Oh, good.
So, Doug Pagitt Radio, now taking questions.
Stump the chump.
Questions that people have about their
Stole that from
thoughts,
Car
about
Talk.
their world, probably about religion. But it could be about,
Anything?
yeah, anything.
Like
Like
what
people are
kinda
just going to,
Running
people are
shoe to
just
wear?
randomly going to ask
Your
me
favorite
questions about
goo?
things that are important. There are many people who are asking questions at this time of year that they don't ask at other times of year. And a mother said to me this week, a mother of small children, who has changed her thinking greatly in her religious, on religious topics, that she's quite concerned because she doesn't now know how to talk to her children about Easter.
Yeah.
Now, Easter should be, when I grew up, I had no angst around Easter because it wasn't a religious holiday.
Yeah.
And when it's not a religious holiday,
It's no problem.
there's no
It's great.
yeah,
There's
it's
eggs. There's candy. There's
chocolate
There's
and
things you find and
bunnies.
bushes.
Yes,
It's good times.
You run around, you look for stuff, springs in the air, there's no
that
angst.
plastic grass.
But once again, religious people have found a way
Mm.
to add a little angst into all of this. And the angst comes around, for some people, around the question of Good Friday. So lots of kids will ask this question. Mama, why do they call it good?
Yep.
Okay.
Jesus is
So
dead.
we've got some serious, quick answer on that one.
They
Son, that was just a real marketing problem. Somebody just
Oh,
picked.
that's what you say.
That's the answer. That's the answer. It's like back in the 50s, doctors said, you know what will help your health? Have a cigarette. just
Calm down.
had it wrong. We just shouldn't be calling it good.
No.
My suggestion. Shouldn't be calling it good. But the deeper question is not just what do you call that particular day when the kids are like, at school or something, and something comes about Good Friday. But the question becomes, when grandparents, when culture, when friends say something about what Easter is connected to, which is the death of Jesus and then the resurrection life. Well, parents have a hard time, and this particular mom said, I don't know how to bring up this topic and talk to my kids because if I don't talk about it, if I just let it go, if I don't bring it up, then they're going to find out the, air quote, real meaning of Easter from everybody else.
Right. It's kind of like sex when you talk to your kids about it. Like
Yeah,
you
if
kind
you
of
don't
want
talk,
to.
somebody else is going to.
Right. You want to fill in the
Yeah.
void before.
Who do you want? Blinky Kardashian? No, that's not her name. Whatever. Do you want those people talking to you about it? Or
Right.
Well, here the problem for a lot of Christians I hang around with who have children now is that person that's going to tell them about the meaning of Easter is the grandparent.
Oh, yeah.
This is their worry, right?
Right.
They're going to have a family get together, and some grandparents think,
They got it.
my kid, or worse yet, my daughter-in-law.
Or they give them stuff like resurrection eggs. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
Tell the whole story. Yeah. They do the whole thing.
So these parents are thinking, my kid or my daughter-in-law,
Yes.
she's not teaching the little ones right.
Yep, I
She's
gotta
not teaching my
fix this up.
grandkids right. So when they come over for whatever spring get-together,
Yeah.
I'm going to lay it on them. I
Yeah.
know grandparents do this. I've
This
talked
might
to
have
them.
happened
I've heard from
in
them.
my
It
family.
may have happened to you. The
maybe.
grandparents are on an agenda, right? And
Oh,
they're
yeah.
going to tell these kids what the mom or
It doesn't stop at Easter.
and it's always worse when it's the daughter-in-law, right? So
Yeah.
worse for the daughter-in-law and worse for the kids. So the dad's parents are more religious than the dad now is, and he would have
Yeah.
stayed more religious if he hadn't married that woman. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is the story.
Oh,
I see
yeah,
it all the
true.
time. And then these kids, so the grandparents then want to read them the story,
Mm-hmm.
tell them a story, and it ends up being told in some version where now I'm going to be snarky, and so, but just to sum it up. God loves you so much that he decided not to take all of his anger out on you, and he took it out on his own kid.
Yeah.
There's the story.
Great story for little kids.
And the kid's like, God and love and parents that are killing their kids so that I can live. And why does God want?
Yep.
Why is God? And then the answer becomes a larger sort of esoteric answer
Yes.
about sin and judgment and all this stuff, and kids get wigged out, and then parents don't know what to say because they
Right.
don't want to say it's not true,
Right.
because that doesn't. Then a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old's just like, well, I think it is, Mom,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
you can't just say like, oh, don't buy that. So you have to say something else. So what does one say
Yeah. What do you recommend?
about all of this? Well, I recommend a couple of things. In
Oh,
fact,
good.
Richard Rohr has a great quote that I'm going to ask him about today. So he's going to be on the show, but he has this great quote where he discusses the fact that he, as a Catholic priest from the order of the Franciscans,
Yes.
where the Pope has now, who wasn't a Franciscan in that order, he
Right,
was a
has-
Jesuit, as it turns out, for people who don't know Catholicism. Within Catholicism, there is a kind of community distinction that would be as rich and diverse as you would have within Protestantism. In the same way you'd have a Methodist and a Presbyterian and a Mennonite. Within Catholicism, you have these different orders, and different priests find themselves as a part of these different orders. So Catholicism has had a lot to do with purporting the notion of God loves you so much they decided not to take all of his anger that he had for you on you, but took it out on his own kid instead.
Right.
Story to solve a big cosmic problem that's been perpetuated by Catholicism
A long time.
better than any other version of Christianity has purported that idea. But Richard Rohr has this little nugget, which I
Okay.
think is a way to say it. He says that for him as a Franciscan, that his community of people have never held to that version of what's called atonement theory, that the sins of the human race were atoned for by Jesus' action because God demanded it.
Right.
That would view the death of Jesus as somehow reconciling God to humans. He says that as a Franciscan, we've always told the story this way, that Jesus didn't come to change the mind of God about humanity, so that God had some raging anger against humanity and Jesus slides in front of it, and so now God thinks differently about humanity because God now gets to look at humanity through Jesus. So not a changed view of God's mind about humanity, but to change the mind of humanity about God.
Okay.
Okay? This is nice. Jesus' death wasn't solving any cosmic problem whatsoever, but rather it was revealing to us our own human problem, that we fear and we kill that which we should love. So what you have then in this story is you can have a story where Jesus becomes the victim of human hatred when Jesus ought to have been the recipient of people's care and affection. Jesus was living out a new humanity. Jesus was living out the call of God. Jesus was living out the fulfillment of God's agenda for the world. And other humans should have come around. And instead, those human beings turned on Jesus, killed him, and God then stayed on the side of Jesus and didn't let death have the final victory. Life came anyway. So you can say to children, yes, it's a very sad thing that Jesus died, but God did not abandon him to the grave. So the Easter story now isn't, now God's anger has been appeased, and now God got over that in a cosmic sense, at least for the people who believe properly about Jesus.
Right.
But rather, God stayed on the side of Jesus, protecting, defending, and bringing life to Jesus in a more whole sense than the evil, hatred, ignorance, which I think is an important one. Jesus on the cross with the Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Then says, life, love, resurrection, newness, completion is way more powerful and accessible than you would ever have evil and sickness and death could ever bring. So then the story gets to be a whole different arrangement where God is on the side of the abandoned. God is on the side of the outcast. God is on the side of the victimized. And that then we have to ask ourselves, have we ever become the victimizers? Have we become the perpetrators against others, and where God has had to bring life? And how could we cease to be those people who are pursuing death instead of love?
Well, I've always
So simple.
I
see?
think it's okay. Well, I think it's okay to say to kids sometimes, I don't know for sure.
No, you don't have to say I don't know, because I just told you what to say.
Well, I
So just play the recording.
But they'll ask you other things too that you haven't had the privilege of hearing what Doug Pagitt says about it, or
Solve that.
and so I just
Like
I mean,
what? What's going through your mind there? What else? What else
well,
is...
for example, okay, so I've always said to my kids, love is the most powerful force in the universe. And I think this story, this Easter story, exemplifies that. But then my son said to me one day, quite some time ago, but he said to me, well, Mommy, if love is the most powerful force in the universe, then why did David kill Goliath? This is a hard question. He's like, did he forget? that love is more powerful. And then he followed it up and said, and I'm glad David killed Goliath because he was really scary. I think that was good. And I said, I don't know why we have to have killing, but I still believe that love is more powerful. And I just didn't know how else to answer the question. It's really a question of violence and violence.
Yes, and I think that's right. It's a question of violence. And if one has a view of the Bible, Jesus, any of this, where every action done by someone who claims the name of God in the Bible is thereby endorsed, then you're in trouble.
Right.
If, rather, we say to our children, there was a time when David thought that was the best thing to do. And there may be times when you think the best thing to do is to bring violence. You might think that it's more expedient, that it's easier, that it's better to get rid of that thing via violence than it is to engage in life and love. Now, I do think we have to moderate love a little bit and not simply use, to play with your phrase a bit, power, like love is more powerful than other things. I think sometimes we choose love and it's not as powerful, but it's still right. Because if you're in a power dynamic, what your son is bringing up is, in the power dynamic, that's not true. An AK-47 with 30 rounds in it is way more powerful than a teacher trying to protect those kids. So let's not, I would suggest, resort to our power is greater than that power. In fact, it might be that we have to change the metaphor away from power into something more beautiful, something that love is not just more powerful, but love is not extinguished by. Love is more beautiful. Love is more dynamic. I think there's a whole set of words we need to use.
I agree. And I also think it can depend on your definition of power and what it means to be powerful. So sometimes, I mean, we talk about this in yoga. Sometimes the most powerful pose is the most vulnerable one because it's allowing you to express something or release something, and that is and I think there's a lot of power and beauty. So it might be that I have sorry, I don't have a button to like when I clear my throat press the button.
You have a neck.
I know.
You have
I know.
It swivels.
I was busy thinking.
Doesn't spin all the way around.
I try not
Yeah,
to.
but I mean, I do think you're onto something that we do have to talk about what we mean by power. And a lot of people struggle with the stories of the faith of Judaism and Christianity because they're like, well, but they did those other things. They killed people, and they killed people because God told them to kill people. That's a very powerful. Now I'm misusing the word. That's a very significant question to raise. So when we see in Jesus, do we see a continuation of that, or do we see a judgment of that? And I think we see a judgment of that. But there are an awful lot of people whose view of the Bible does not allow them
they want to
have
see
there
a
be a
different kind of
development.
arc.
They want God to be the same in their day as God was perceived in all days, because obviously these people were righteous. So there's a whole view of God and the people who speak about God that comes into play. And one needs not get into all of that with every
Little
child.
kids.
I do think there is a point at which you can say to a child, every new way of thinking about this might seem a little confusing for now. And that's an okay that's an okay thing. Because when the kid's like, well, someone was telling me that God told David to kill Goliath. I mean, he heard a story that God ordained that. And that seemed to make sense to him. That's where one has to start to say, but just because you've seen good, righteous people do things doesn't mean that's the calling for all people to do those things. And that begins then to say, let's think differently about this entire story. Because it really, I'm convinced it has boiled down to a question of power and violence versus beauty and life.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not on a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
Some people want to put power on one side and pacifism on the other. And where are you on that continuum?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're on the same continuum.
Mm-hmm.
I think you jump off of one track and get on
Got
to
another.
another one.
This is a
You're
whole
not just
different
further
tunnel.
down the road. Maybe you've jumped off the track and now gotten into a helicopter.
You get
now,
on the
now
wrong
you're traveling
subway.
in a whole
No
different
matter
way.
how long you stay on it, you're not going to get to
Right.
that
So
place.
I think and these opportunities then should be raised. When the parent says to the child, no, it's not that God was taking out God's anger on Jesus instead of on you, because that shows how much God loves you and loves his son. Instead, what's being heard is there's a story of God that stays on the side of those who have suffered from the violence and the power systems and power structures.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we see that on the playground, in your own life, when mom and dad fight, anytime, then we have to make a choice to see beauty in life as opposed to choosing the avenues of power and expediency.
Mm-hmm. Well,
What child couldn't understand that? Happy Easter, everybody.
I know. Now I have
Happy-
other questions. I'm gonna have to
happy Easter.
put in some questions in your file.
Yeah, so put in some questions if you want to do that. Now, most of the questions that I have already queued up are ones that people have actually asked me, but I'm really excited to hear the questions that are being raised by the people of the listenership of this radio program. So over on Doug Pagitt Radio, there's an input tab, and you could put in a question or a comment about any of this, or if you follow it on Ustream or over on the YouTube or on Spreaker, we would take those comments anywhere you can get them. Or maybe even Sidekick Victoria would write a reflection
About what?
on this. Maybe.
Maybe.
I'll just, all the guy can do is hope. All the guy can do on a frozen day is hope for a thaw.